the code that we like work on last session. For your midterm exam, just keep in mind, anything that you're gonna work, most of the things that you're gonna work on, or maybe everything that you're gonna work on this session, next session, the second after, session after that, is only part of your final project, not your midterm exam. Anything that like before this session, like the practice we did last session, the practice we did like the week before, those are the like things that you would expect to like it's something in that range to be in the midterm exam. You will have a project the same way. Let's say the midterm exam, your first midterm exam. You could have had like that same project, this time implemented with an object-oriented programming. That would be something that you can expect from the midterm exam. But anything that we are going to work on this session is not going to be part of the midterm exam, but final project. And I will like send you the details of the final project hopefully next week. So last session we done, like implemented the class. Okay, so the class for reservation. We spent time adding like everything or like creating a very nice template for reservations. We added like the methods, we added the properties, constructor, and so on. And then we started like actually create an object from the class, okay, and storing information in the like there's like the objects and let's read them down. Okay, so we're gonna continue that this session and then move on to actually like thinking that okay, in a world like this, we don't like work with 2 reservations. We work with hundreds of reservations. We have a table of thousands of reservations. So how do we manage that data? How we're going to deal with that? Before I get to that point, you already have the code. I will suppose so that you probably have it. One thing, let's just like make a change here. I want to make change, which is like change this reservation name to reservation 1, and I'll tell you later. It's just like changing the name. That's it. This was the first reservation, and this was the second reservation. So like we got the reservation information stored in the object and then printed out the information about the reservations. Okay. Now we're gonna like work on to day 2 of this project. Okay. So day 2 of this project is going to be about like understanding how to like deal with a ton of data. Before that, let me do this and say, okay, we already like practice, like for example, like printing out some information, like the reservations information. Let me do this like here before we get to these queries. I want to like do this in this context. Okay, so let me add this here. I want to like simulate updating the return date for reservation ID. Okay, so I remove this. Okay, this is the reservation ID, and then I want to set its return date to this date. Okay, so that's what I want to do. Here's the thing. My work is very simple. Why? Because I only have 2 reservations and I look at the like the objects and I see that, okay, this reservation is stored in that object. So I can just say, okay, this is very simple. I'll say for this reservation 1, because that's like, you see, I find out with the reservation ID is 1001, and that's like, I think that was the reservation 1001, okay? So the second one, let me just make sure that I'm correct. The second one is the reservation ID, okay? So this is the like reservation ID, right? So that means for that object, like for that reservation, dot the return date, okay? It's a property. The property tells you that like, hey, get and set. You can get the value of return date and you can set a value to return date. So that means I can use this and say set its date to this date. Okay. Why is like in this case, it's simple because I only have 2 reservation informations. Or at least I know if this reservation is stored in that object. So I can just say reservation 1, the return date is set to this. So I'm updating the date of that reservation. Okay. Next, this time we want to do this, okay? Again, update the state for reservation with reservation ID 10012. Okay. You want to change the reservation rental estate. I think that was the variable to drop off. So again, I have only two reservations. Okay. I can see this object holds the information about this reservation. Using this, I can see that that's the object. So if I'm going to update the information for that reservation, I'm going to use that object and say, okay, so basically reservation two dot uh, rental estate should be set to drop off. Okay. Just remember, after this, we are thinking about like a real system, basically saying that like this will happen when, for example, like in the system, you want to change the state of that reservation to dropped off. And that's the code you will do if you want to change the state of the reservation to drop off. If you want to change, like let's say, if you want to change the return date, the user goes to to the reservation and clicks on the return date and wants to change and update the reservation date. And that's what will happen. We're just working with like a system now. It's not just like variables. This is actually how we implement the programs and software. Okay. So that's about it. That's about it. If you have one, two objects, one, two reservations, we can clearly see in which object this reservation is information is stored. Do we store information in the classes? No, classes is just a template. You create instances from the classes that you like from the classes, and then you store information in the objects, in the instances. The same way that we did here. You created an instance from the class and then stored information in that instance. The same way here, you create an instance from the class and then store information inside the object or instance. And since you can like clearly see which of them like holds the information about this particular reservation, you can clearly use the object that holds that information, reservation one, reservation two, and update the information about that reservation. Okay. Okay. Any questions so far? Let's make it a little bit more realistic. In a realistic world, we don't have two reservations. We have hundreds of reservations. We can just use this. The reason that we started talking about object-oriented programming was that, okay, what if I have hundreds of reservations? Initially, I worked on like creating variables and storing information in variables in separate variables. That didn't work for me because I had hundreds of reservations. I wouldn't be able to create one variable for each reservation. Then we learned about the list and said, okay, list allows you to create like a store information about multiple types of like the same data. For example, a list of a string about like customer names. That didn't work out. Again, why? Because then in this case, that would mean that I have, how many variables do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know, 5, 6, 7. That would mean that if I wanted to implement this with lists, I would at least have 7 lists. And then I would have to manage to figure out like in index where is the customer ID is stored, where is the like a reservation ID is stored, and they would be stored in separate lists. So it didn't work out as well. So what happened? We started learning about the objects and say, okay, I'm going to create treat them as a single entity and say, this is a single entity with these characteristics, these features, which become the fields where you store information about that entity. The same way that you would have in a database, you have multiple entities and each entity has its own attributes. Now, list. Okay, list of reservation. Not just one reservation, but a list of reservations. So we learn about the list. How do we create a list? List and add like the signs. Inside this, what would you add if you were creating a list of strings? It would be a string, right? That would be the data type of the list. Now, I don't want to create like a list of one data point, like a string integer. I want to create a list of reservations. So that means I'm creating a list of like from a class, not just one in like a string, one integer, one data type of variable, but a class. So that means I'm creating a list of from the reservation class. You can create list from a class. You say, okay, I'm going to create a list like from a reservation, say from the class. And inside that list, I will store information about every reservation. I will name this reservations. The same way I said, anytime you want to name a list, just use the plural version of that, like a, like the object. It was like the names, name for names, reservations for reservation equals new, and then again, list like that, again, reservation, the class, and then curly brackets and semicolon. Okay. So we create a list from the class of reservation. Okay. If it was a string, so like if it was a, let's say it was an integer, list of integer, like the ages. Okay. In each of them, if it was a list of ages, let's say age 1, age 2, like for each customer, it would have numbers. Now you have reservations. Okay. Reservation. List of reservations. So each one of them is one reservation. Not just like reservation customer ID, not like just the customer ID, not the reservations like reservation ID, but the whole information about that reservation. So each one of them is only like is one information about one reservation. Okay, one reservation. So let's add the reservations like that we have. We already have some reservations. Reservations, how do we add to a list? By dot add, right? Add, and then reservation 1. Okay, I had already reservation 1's information. The same way, reservation 2 dot add. Oh, reservation, sorry. Dot add reservation 2. Okay, so I created a list, added the result, like one single reservation added to the list. Now my list includes 2 reservations. I can have hundreds of reservations in this list. Okay, now I deal with like how as much as like reservations that I can add it to the list, and like I can basically store that information. Okay, again, what we did this time, we created list, but this time from the class. From the class inside that like signs like greater greater and then like less than equal, what is it? We added the class name and say we are creating a list from that class, and then store the objects from that class, because each one of them is one object from the like reservation class. We already created them. Okay, so we added that information. Okay, so now let's go back to these like queries. Okay, so we want to create these queries, go through these queries and like work on them. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Query 1, print out all the reservations information. Okay, so how many reservations do I have? I know it's 2, but maybe I don't know it. I can like check the reservations like dot count to get the size of the list. But in order to, how do you like go through a list? you have to use a loop, right? We did use the loops to go through a list. So that means if I want to like print out information that is a story about each reservation, I have to iterate through the list using a loop and then print out the information. So for each, okay, for each, and you remember that like the first one, like in for each, the first one was like a string name in names, a string age in ages. That was the data type of the like that variable. In this case, what do I have? It's the reservation. It's from the class. Reservation in reservations. Okay, because I created a list from this class. This list is from the like the reservation class. So that means when I'm creating it like a variable, basically this is an object. This time it's an object from the class. It's not just one variable, it's an object. Okay. Reservation, reservation in reservation. For each reservation in reservations, okay. So what should we do? Maybe like I use the like the method like that I created console.writeLine. Okay. For each reservation in reservations, print out like do reservation dot. It's I created this, right? This reservation is this one. So it's an object from the same class. Reservation dot generate reservation, then close the parentheses. Okay. So for every reservation in that list, I print out the information about the reservation. Now we are interacting with objects, not just one variable, but like every object. Like we say for every reservations, like whatever is like the task that you're doing. But you have to iterate through the list because now you don't have just one object, one variable. You have a list of objects, the same way that you would have list of variables. So you have to find that variable or find that like object and then perform the task. In this case, we weren't looking for a particular reservation. We wanted to just like print out like the reservations information, reservations that we had. Okay. So let me just like comment like some of these prints. So I can just have this and then I can print out the information. Okay. So I only have like two reservations and I printed out like each one of them. I will add this like a plus double slash n. So it like places in a space. Okay. So first reservation and second reservation. So the list stores information about the like the reservations. So we only have two reservations. You can add as many reservations you have in this list. As many like records that you have in the table, you can store the information in the list and then like basically iterate through the list and like perform that task. Is it the search? Are you looking for a particular reservation? Are you printing out the reservation information for a customer or so many other like other queries? Every query that you can write for a database, you are going to like write it here as well in the program format. We're going to practice a few of them today. Question. No. Okay. So how about the second one? Okay. So simulate updating your return date for reservation with this reservation ID. In the previous version, what I said was that I already knew that like this, like the reservation ID, like reservation, that reservation ID is stored in that object. This time, I don't know because I've stored information in the list. I don't know in which part of this list this reservation exists. Yes, like if you look at this part, let's ignore this and like you don't know, let's say you have hundreds of reservations. and you don't know in which of these like locations that reservation is stored. First, you find it and then make the update. So first, I'm going to have to search through the list to find out where that reservation is stored. Okay, so what I will do is like I will do a loop, like reservation in reservations. If, okay, so I said in for each, instead of an index, you treat like you work with that like a variable. Like in the past, we would like for like we would use the variable. Like for example, for each age in ages, for each name in names, and then you would use the name or age. In this case, you will use the object. Every time in every iteration, information about one of the reservations from the list is taken down and then it's stored in the reservation, and then you can use it. That's why we say for each reservations, check the reservation, okay? Check the reservation, and it's an object from the class. So when you like say dot, you will see, because it's just an object from the same class, so it has the same attributes, same designs, same methods. And I can say, okay, check it to see if the reservation ID is equal to 101. If the reservation ID is equal to that, what should happen? We want to like update. Let's say we're going to just do an update and say, okay, so let's see. Okay. How about this? We go from the beginning. Okay. So let's do this with an index. First, let's find out in which part of which location. Remember, like if you wanted like to iterate through a list, we said the lists are equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Okay. So what if first I find out the index and then I'll do the update? So I want to separate them. Okay, that's why I will create two fields. Okay, I will say integer. Okay, I will have a counter equal set to 0, and then index set to -1. I'll tell you why I set the index to -1. Okay. So why two variables? I want to have one counter. I'm searching through the list, and like the counter is moving like next and next and next until I find that there's like a reservation that actually like that's the one that I'm looking for. Okay, so the counter is going to move on one at a time. That's why I will have here to say counter plus plus. Okay, so I wanted to say counter is equal to 0, counter equal to 1, counter equal to 2. So I go like one at a time. And then if you find a match, if you find like a reservation that is reservation ID is equal to this, what should happen? That's when you put index equal to counter. Okay, so if you said counter is 0, let's say like the reservations are stored here in index 4. So the counter moves on, and then counter is equal to 4, and that's when we find the reservation with that reservation ID. That's when index equals to like counter, that means it will be set to 4. And the other thing is, we already know that only one reservation we have with that reservation ID. Let's think of them like a database. There's only one reservation with that reservation ID. So that means the search is over. That means the search is over. Once I find that reservation, I will store it in the index, and then it's over. Now let me go back to -1. Why did I set to -1? Because the list, the index always start from 0. I cannot set the index to 0. I set it to -1, so I can say after this, okay, if index is not equal to -1, that means I found it in my search. Okay, so I set this index to -1. If after this search the index is still -1, that means I didn't find it. If I set the index to 0, the mistake would be that we forgot that we actually have something in 0, and we cannot set the index to 0. Okay, so if I set this index to 0, and here I wanted to try to see if I found it, it would be problematic because actually the list starts from 0. Maybe the reservations are stored in 0 actually. So that's why I didn't set it to 0. I set it to -1. So if I find it, okay, if I find it, great. So now I can do this. So what was the point? I need to update this, right? Okay, great. Reservations index dot return date should be set to the state. Let's review what happened. First, we search through the through the list to see if we have a reservation with that reservation ID. If we have a reservation with that reservation ID. So for each reservations, we check the reservation. If we found the reservation, we are looking for in which part of this list that reservation is stored. So we are looking for that index. I use a counter to iterate through the list every time. I want to know where is the stored. So I use the counter to counter through the list. Basically, every time we move on one at a time, it adds 1 to the counter. And then if finally I find a match, it will store that value, the current value of counter in the index, the other variable, and then breaks out because it knows that there is only one reservation with that reservation ID. We are looking at a list of reservations. It's the same way, in a database, you had a table of reservations. In that table, reservation ID would be a primary key. You want to treat that the same way here. Okay, and then if I found if the index is not -1, that means the value of index here it was updated. So finally, I found found where that reservations information is stored. That's why I use the index. So in that list, find using that index, the return date of that reservation should be updated to this. Okay. Okay, so you can see similarities between different database. It would be like doing some select from and then where, that sort of things, right? You use where to search for where reservation ID is equal to this. Select from which from the reservation. Here you have the list now become those tables. Every record in the table would be one reservation. Now, every one of them in the reservation list, every one of them is one reservation. You're storing objects in a list. Each object stores information about one reservation. So if you repeat that, that becomes a little bit more clear how we're treating this list and how we are working with it. Okay, let's do the next one. Next query. Okay, so what is the next query this time? We are simulating updating a state for reservation with the reservation ID equal to this one, not RS. Let me remove this part to drop off. Can you think about it and like work on it, and then like we can work together. Let me give you 2 minutes to work on this. I just noticed one thing that I didn't do. Um, One thing I didn't do after this, I updated the return date, right? But I forgot that actually we calculate the total cost based on based on the dates. If I updated the return date, that means that I had to after that also like update the total cost as well. If I use the same information, my total cost is not going to be correct. Because after updating the return date for that reservation, I didn't like update the total cost. Just in this case, what I will do is that I will call this, it's like reservations index, since it's the return date, like because the total cost depends on the period, right? So let me just call this again. How do we call it? We need to call to calculate the total cost. Okay. So it updates the value. So it updates the value of the like the total cost. Let me, if you might have like forgot about like this part, let's see what happens. Like in the calculate total cost, we would get like first, we'll call this method to like get the like the number of days between the rental, like what was it? Okay, so the other one. We would get the number the rental period. We would get the rental period and then we would calculate the total cost. Okay, calculate the total cost, the daily rate, multiply by like different days. If I change the like the pickup date, if I change the like the end date, that means I also needed to like recalculate or like check the total cost as well. So that's what I did. Okay, so I added that as like that too. Okay, you might think that like, okay, this method is going to return a value. Anytime I created this, just in case, anytime you want to like get the value of the calculation, I created this to return the value. In this case, I don't need it, so I didn't store it in any other variable. If I wanted to, I could have like say, okay, like again, just double like total cost. Okay, if I needed to basically store that information and use it. But because I created the method in a way that returns the calculation results too. But in this case, I didn't need it, but I needed to recalculate this so the object's information is updated. So I didn't like use this part. I only called the method, so recalculates it, and the object carries the information. It's a field. So once it's updated, like the information in the like the object will be updated as well. Okay. So next one, simulate updating a state for reservation. Here's the thing. Now you see the benefits of methods. I'm not using methods in this session. Okay. So, however, you can see that again, I have a very similar query with a little bit different. So what I will do, I will copy paste the thing that is not that fun. Okay. I will copy paste again. You see how much like code I'm like just like wasting here is that okay, um 0. I need to reset the values. Okay. I need to reset the values. And then again, this time I'm looking for this particular reservation. So the code didn't change because this code is very general. It's asking like it will like get a value like check for a particular reservation with a reservation number and finds the index. Probably I'll need the same thing here. Okay. And then again, I want to check if index is not -1, then this time, what do I want to do? I want to change the reservation index dot rental estate. It's set to drop off. Okay. So the code, this part is pretty much similar because we're just doing the search to find the index where in that list the reservations are stored. Once we find it, then for that particular reservation using the index, the rental estate needs to be set to drop off or like updated to drop off. Okay, how about the next one? So the next one is this. Print the full reservation details for reservation. Get the reservation information from the user, and then print out the information. Input, process, output. probably up to this point, you would have hated me for like why like we have to like again and again and again step like think about okay, the code works, but you're like telling me no, implement the code this way. But you see the benefit. If you create modules, you can create this module as many times you want. You don't have to like create this many times. And once you create like separate input process output, that's when you can use the same component for any type of like queries. If I like basically think about, I'm gonna put this for the next session when like we implement the code and like add with the methods. But you can see, I can put this part into a method and like do all these questions with just one method and reuse the code every time, just call the method, get the index and update the information. And the benefit that like I'm separating input from process output is that every time actually some of them will be different, but like finding the index will be similar. Sometimes you will look for like a reservation ID. Next time you will look for a customer ID. Next time you will look for like an auto ID. You can implement similar methods, but with the difference that one looks for a customer ID, one looks for a reservation ID, one looks for like basically auto ID. And then you can implement any type of query you want with probably just 3, 4 like methods. Reuse the code. That's like the idea behind creating modular programs. If you create modular programs first that are independent from the user interface, how do you create a program that is independent from user interface? When you create classes, when you create methods, do not use console. Think that like, okay, I'm using this, like, I will use this same code in any type of user interface. How do I do this? I will think about there is no involvement of the user interface. That way you will think about how do I create this like module that is like not using console or not using anything related to like visual Windows, like Windows application. You create something like a one that we created. We created a module reservation that is independent from user interface. It doesn't matter which user interface you use, you can import this code into that module like program. You can like create the same program that we do in like Windows application. Because we didn't think which user interface we will use, we just implemented the code regardless of the user interface. Okay, so I go back here and I say, okay, for prompt the user for like a user for the reservation ID. So I'll just use the like copy paste here. Okay, where was it? Do I have it now? Okay. Okay, console again, console right line, enter reservation ID. Int reserve ID convert to int console. Okay, this is my input. Get the input. Create methods that are independent, but also like create programs that like each part is being done separately, single task. So first, the task is to get the input. That is independent from process. I get the reservation ID. Now I want to like find whether this reservation exists. Okay, so I already have implemented the code actually, right? Here, I actually knew the value of reservation ID, but this time I'm getting it from the user. But it doesn't change the fact that like that's the case. Instead of having that number, I have the reserve ID. Okay. Again, I'm reusing this, copy pasting the same code. That's why I say copy pasting is useless, because you see the length of the program will increase. We keep repeating and copy pasting the same code over and over again because we didn't create the program using methods. So we can reuse the same code. But that's good because we'll see the benefit of like using like modules and creating like a modular code, like using methods. Okay. So I get the reservation ID. check it to find, like search through the list, and if index is not equal to -1, okay, just this time console write line reservations, okay, index, and let's say, for example, like use that method that creates the receipt. Okay, so first input, get the use by import from the user, and then process. Search for it, like to find the reservation. If the reservation exists, you should find the index in which part of this list of reservations you will store that reservations information. Yes.
Could you do it without the counter and the index in this case? Could you just do for each if, and then instead of doing index equals counter break, could you just do the console write line or no?
You can do this, but here's the thing. Then you would have to create the same code because you didn't create one module. Let's see what you like. She indicates. So basically, yes, I will say this one. Okay, I will say console dot write line, and that would be mean that like reservation. Okay, reservation dot generate this. Okay, and then break. That is correct. This should be a correct implementation. That's what you meant, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. This is correct. But here's the thing. Then if you have to implement this code for a different type of query, you would have to like do this. You wouldn't like in this case, okay, you would have to use it in it. You can't use this one. Okay. I mean, you cannot use this code for the other, like for the other question, for this one, for updating it. The idea behind like creating modules that like perform single task is that if you create these modules, then you reduce the like the size of your program. In this way, the first one is to just find the index, and then if you do that, okay, in this one, you would have to do the same thing here, and you would have to do the same thing here. First, find the index, and then do the task. That way, you're doing like a lot of them similarly. But if you uniquely, because what you're saying is correct in the program one, but we want to like think a little bit more professionally and think, if I create codes every time for one single query that works only for one single query, what's the problem with that? I have 20 queries, hundreds of queries. Then I have to create the 30, 100, so many like version of the same code. So let me think how I can reduce that by creating modular queries that I think, how can I generalize this, okay? Not actually implementing it for one particular query. Because with that, you're creating one, this code only works for this one. In the second one, if I say for the reservation ID, instead of printing out the information, only print out, okay? Let's say I ask you to only print out like the, what is it? The rental estate. Then you would have to do the same code again, uniquely for that particular query. And again, do the same because you have to copy paste the whole thing here. Because you limited yourself to every single query, not generally. Does that make sense? What is the difference here? It's thinking that like how I can create more general program, not just thinking about one single query, because that way you're reducing the amount of coding that you're doing. Okay, so if I didn't do this and I actually stick to my idea of finding the index, okay, finding the index and then breaking out, I wouldn't have to do this. I would only code this program, this part only once, but any type of query that you give me, print out the information, print out the rental estate. That would be uniquely just adding one line of code. Okay. If I ask you to like instead of this, here only like prints out like for the same index, but rental estate. So that would mean that you only changed one line of code because this part was generally created. However, if you created that, then you would have to completely create that part of the code for every query. And that would mean that like overdoing same thing and same thing over and over for like similar queries. This becomes over time like the idea that like I create the code, like the query, the program, and it just becomes over practice, that same thing. I don't want to do this over and over again. I don't want to waste my time doing the same thing every day. So let me think, let me be more like creative and thinking, how can I reduce my job? How like the amount of work I do every day? If I know that like some like process happens over time frequently, why not just create that process and reuse that over and over again? And that's the idea behind what we are doing here, creating methods, creating classes, one class, and then reuse it over and over again. It's a template. The method is a template. You think that this template will be used many times, the same way here. Okay, I use the same part for search 3 times. I had to copy paste it. If I implemented this part with method, I would implement it one time and I would reuse it over and over again. Just like that would be much simpler for me. So both program, both versions will perform like the query correctly. But the idea is that we want to like create better programs. We want to create programs that perform the task in a more like proficient way, I guess I would say. Okay. I talk too much about it. Okay. So let's see. What's the next one? Print out the customer information for reservation. Okay. Again, I'll do this because I'll do this again with just a copy paste. Okay. So what is this one? Print out the customer information. As you asked, this time you're going to only print out the customer information. Find the reservation, like prompt the user to give you the reservation ID, and then print out the customer information. So what I will do, I will copy paste this part again. Okay. So for this one, first, okay, not like this time, I already defined it. So prompt out the user to give you the reservation info, like ID. Search for the reservation. And then once you find it, if the index is -1, not -1, then console that right line, okay, reservations index dot customer ID. Okay. Because of the way I implemented this became so easy. It becomes easy after we put this inside the method, and you will see how much it becomes much easier. But you see, this part is separated. I didn't put it inside that search. Okay, so I prompt the user to get the reservation, search to find the reservation, get the index, and once you have the index, then you can get like that is the cost. Who is the customer who placed that reservation? Okay, good. Okay, we have a attendance check, I think. So let me see. Hopefully we have it. That okay, please take it.